The rain came down in sheets that November evening, turning the cobblestone streets of downtown into rivers of reflected neon. Inside Margot's diner, the fluorescent lights hummed their eternal song, casting everything in that particular shade of yellow that made even the youngest faces look tired. Elena Reyes stood behind the counter, her hands moving in the practiced rhythm of someone who'd poured 10,000 cups of coffee without thinking about it. The white apron tied around her waist had a small tear near the pocket. She'd meant to sew it 3 weeks ago but hadn't found the time between double shifts and visiting her mother at Riverside Care. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The dinner rush had ended an hour ago, leaving only the stragglers. Marcus, the night security guard from the bank across the street, nursing his decough and working on a crossword. Mrs. Chen, who came in every Thursday to eat half a turkey sandwich and leave the rest wrapped in napkin for the morning birds. And Tommy, the dishwasher, visible through the kitchen window as he scrubbed at a particularly stubborn pot. Elena glanced at the clock. 8:47. In 13 minutes, her shift would end, and she'd walk the 9 blocks to the bus stop, ride 40 minutes across town, and climb 3 flights of stairs to the studio apartment she shared with her younger sister, Lucia. They'd eat whatever was in the refrigerator, probably the leftover pasta from Tuesday, and Lucia would tell her about the community college classes she was taking, the ones Elena paid for with tips and overtime hours. The bell above the door chimed, bringing in a gust of wind that scattered napkins from the dispenser on table 6. Elena looked up and felt her breath catch. The woman who entered wasn't dressed for the weather. She wore what looked like an expensive silk blouse, cream-colored, now plastered to her skin and nearly transparent from the rain, and tailored black pants that clung to her legs. Her hair, cut in a sleek bob that probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent, hung in wet strands around a face that was striking even in distress. But it was the way she moved that caught Elena's attention. A slight stumble, arms wrapped around herself, teeth chattering audibly even from across the room. "Sweet Jesus," Mrs. Chen muttered, looking up from her sandwich. "That girl's gonna catch her death." The woman made it to the counter, gripping the edge with hands that had gone white at the knuckles. Up close, Elena could see she was younger than she'd first appeared. Maybe 35, with high cheekbones and eyes that might have been green or gray in better light. Right now, they just looked desperate. "Coffee," the woman managed through chattering teeth. "Please. Hot. Black." Elena was already moving, grabbing the carafe from the warmer. "Sit down before you fall down, honey. Counter or booth?" "Counter's fine." The woman slid onto a stool with the careful movements of someone fighting to maintain control. When Elena set the mug in front of her, she wrapped both hands around it like it was a lifeline, not caring that the ceramic had to be hot enough to burn. "You want something to eat?" Elena asked, studying the woman's face with practiced concern. She'd worked at Margot's for 6 years, long enough to recognize every shade of human desperation that walked through that door. Just the coffee." The woman's voice was cultured, with the kind of accent that came from expensive schools and international travel. Elena noticed her jewelry then. A simple watch that was definitely not simple, and a ring on her right hand that caught the light and threw it back in prismatic colors. Marcus looked over from his crossword, frowning. "Miss, you need me to call someone? You look like you've been through something." The woman shook her head, took a scalding sip of coffee, and closed her eyes. "Car broke down. Phone died. Tried to walk to find help." She opened her eyes and managed a wan smile. "Turns out I'm not very good at walking in heels in the rain." Elena glanced down and winced. The woman's shoes, delicate things with thin straps and impossibly high heels, were clearly expensive and equally clearly destroyed. One heel was snapped completely off, and the woman's feet, visible through the soaked leather, looked raw and bleeding. "Tommy," Elena called toward the kitchen. "Bring me the first aid kit." "I'm fine," the woman protested, but she was shivering so hard the coffee sloshed in the mug. "You're hypothermic," Elena said flatly. "Mrs. Chen, would you go flip the sign on the door to closed?" "Marcus, can you grab that blanket from the break room?" They moved without question. These regulars who'd become something like family over the years of shared late nights and quiet conversations. Elena came around the counter, taking in the full picture of the woman's condition. The silk blouse wasn't just wet. It was ruined, torn at the shoulder where she must have caught it on something. Her pants had a streak of mud up one leg. But it was the shivering that worried Elena most. She'd seen hypothermia before, working the late shifts during winter months. It was nothing to mess with. Marcus returned with the blanket. Scratchy gray wool that had been in the break room since before Elena started working there. He draped it around the woman's shoulders, and she pulled it close with a grateful sound. "You live far from here?" Elena asked, kneeling to examine the woman's feet. The blisters were worse than she'd thought, already forming on both heels and across the balls of her feet. "Upper East," the woman said, which told Elena everything she needed to know. That was 40 minutes away by car, longer by public transit, and a world away in every way that mattered. Tommy emerged from the kitchen with the first aid kit, his round face creased with concern. "Mierda," he muttered, seeing the woman's feet. "That's bad, Elena." "I know." Elena opened the kit, pulling out antiseptic wipes and bandages. "This is going to sting," she told the woman, and began carefully cleaning the wounds. The woman hissed through her teeth but didn't pull away. "Thank you," she said quietly. God, this is embarrassing. "I'm Vivienne Laurent." The name meant nothing to Elena, but she saw Mrs. Chen's eyes widen slightly. Marcus, too, seemed to recognize it, though he kept his expression neutral. "Elena Reyes," Elena said, focusing on wrapping the bandages with gentle precision. "And don't be embarrassed. Everyone needs help sometimes." "You're very kind." Vivienne's voice had steadied somewhat, though she was still shivering. "Most people would have just... well, never mind what most people would have done." Elena finished with the bandages and stood, studying Vivienne with a critical eye. The blanket helped, but it wasn't enough. The woman needed to get warm, properly warm, and soon. The problem was that Elena only had 13 minutes, 11 now, left on her shift, and then she had to catch the bus. If she missed the 8:57, the next one wouldn't come for another hour, and Lucia would worry. But looking at Vivienne, at the way she clutched that coffee mug like it was the only solid thing in a tilting world, Elena made a decision that would change everything. "Here," she said, untying her apron. She walked to the coat rack near the door where her jacket hung. A puffy down thing in faded navy blue that she'd bought 3 years ago at a thrift store for $15. It wasn't fashionable, wasn't even particularly nice looking with its frayed cuffs and the small stain on the left sleeve that never quite came out. But it was warm, and right now that was what mattered. She brought it back to the counter. "Put this on." Vivienne stared at her. "I can't take your jacket." "You're not taking it. I'm giving it to you. There's a difference." Elena held it out insistently. "Look, you need to get warm. That blanket's not enough and you've got to get home somehow. Put it on." "But what will you wear?" Vivienne's eyes, definitely green, Elena could see now, were wide with something that might have been shock or might have been the beginning of tears. "I've got a sweater in my locker. I'll be fine." This was a lie. The sweater in her locker was thin cotton, nowhere near warm enough for the November rain. But Elena had been cold before. She knew how to manage it. And this woman, this Vivienne Laurent with her expensive watch and ruined shoes, looked like she'd never been truly cold in her life until tonight. Vivienne took the jacket with trembling hands. She slipped it on over the blanket, and despite the size difference, Elena was shorter, rounder, built for endurance rather than elegance. The jacket seemed to wrap around Vivienne like an embrace. She zipped it up, and for the first time since she'd walked through the door, her shivering began to ease. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much. I'll return it, I promise. If you give me your address." "Don't worry about it," Elena said, waving a hand. "Just get yourself home safe. That's payment enough." Marcus cleared his throat. "Miss Laurent, I'm getting off shift in 20 minutes. I can drive you home if you'd like. It's on my way." Another lie, Elena suspected, but a kind one. Vivienne looked between them. Elena, Marcus, Mrs. Chen, who'd returned to her table but was watching with bright, interested eyes, Tommy visible in the kitchen window, and something in her face crumpled and rebuilt itself. I don't know how to thank you all. Any of you. Then don't, Elena said simply. She glanced at the clock. 9:02. She'd missed the bus, which meant she'd be walking part of the way home after all, or waiting an hour in the rain for the next one. Lucia would definitely worry. But she looked at Vivienne, warm now in Elena's jacket, her color returning, and felt that particular satisfaction that came from doing the right thing even when it was inconvenient. Elena, Tommy called from the kitchen. Boss called. Says there's a pipe leak in the back. Wants you to stay to deal with the cleanup crew. Elena closed her eyes briefly. Of course there was a pipe leak. She'd be here until midnight at least, maybe later, which meant missing the 10 o'clock bus too, which meant, well, she'd figure it out. Go on, she told Vivienne. Marcus will take care of you. Vivienne stood slowly, testing her bandaged feet in the ruined shoes. She looked at Elena for a long moment, and there was something in her gaze that Elena couldn't quite read. An assessment, maybe, or a calculation, or perhaps just genuine gratitude. I won't forget this, she said. I promise you, Elena Reyes. I won't forget. Then she was gone, following Marcus out into the rain, wrapped in Elena's $15 thrift store jacket. Mrs. Chen came up to the counter as Elena began clearing Vivienne's coffee mug. Do you know who that was? She asked quietly. She said her name was Vivienne Laurent. Vivienne Laurent, Mrs. Chen repeated, emphasizing each syllable. The fashion designer. She's been in Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, everywhere. Her collections sell for thousands of dollars. Tens of thousands, for some pieces. Elena paused in her wiping of the counter. Oh, Mrs. Chen echoed, a small smile playing at her lips. You just gave your jacket to one of the most successful designers in the country. Elena looked at the door, at the rain still pouring down outside, at her reflection in the darkened window. A tired woman in a stained apron, hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail, face lined with the particular exhaustion that came from working 2 jobs to keep your family afloat. Then she shrugged. She needed it, she said simply. Tommy emerged from the kitchen, shaking his head. Cleanup crew's gonna be here in 30 minutes. Boss says he'll pay you overtime. Overtime meant extra money, which meant maybe she could buy Lucia that anatomy textbook she needed, the one that cost $80 and wasn't in any of the libraries. Overtime meant one step closer to paying off their mother's medical bills. Overtime meant survival. Okay, Elena said, tying her apron back on. Let's get this done. But as she worked through the night, helping the cleanup crew with the burst pipe, mopping water that seemed to multiply the more she cleaned it, she kept thinking about Vivienne Laurent, about the way she'd looked in that thrift store jacket, like it was the most precious thing she'd ever worn. About the promise in her voice. I won't forget. Elena didn't believe in fairy tales. She'd stopped believing in them when her father left, when her mother got sick, when she dropped out of nursing school to work full-time to support Lucia's education. She knew that rich people said things they didn't mean, made promises in moments of vulnerability that evaporated in the morning light. But something about tonight felt different. Something about the way Vivienne had looked at her, at all of them. Marcus, Mrs. Chen, Tommy, this collection of night shift workers and regulars who'd come together without question to help a stranger. Felt like a door opening onto a future Elena couldn't quite imagine. It was 1:30 in the morning by the time she locked up the diner. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets washed clean and gleaming. Elena stood on the curb, looking up and down the empty street, and realized she'd have to walk the whole way home. 9 blocks to where the buses stopped running. Then another 2 miles to her apartment. She pulled her thin cotton sweater tighter around her shoulders and started walking. The November air bit through the fabric almost immediately, but Elena had been cold before. She knew how to keep moving, how to generate warmth through motion and determination. Somewhere across the city, Vivienne Laurent was probably home by now, warm and safe in what Elena imagined was a beautiful house or apartment. Maybe she'd already forgotten about the waitress and the diner and the jacket. Maybe she'd throw it away, this cheap puffy thing that didn't match anything in her expensive wardrobe. Or maybe, and Elena let herself imagine this as she walked through the quiet streets. Maybe Vivienne would remember. Maybe something would come of this strange night, this collision of two worlds that normally never touched. By the time Elena reached her apartment, her fingers were numb and her teeth were chattering. But when she climbed those 3 flights of stairs and opened the door to find Lucia still awake, curled up on their second-hand couch with a medical textbook, worry etched across her face, Elena felt warm anyway. "Where were you?" Lucia demanded, jumping up. "I was so worried. You're freezing. Pipe burst at work?" Elena explained, letting her sister pull her inside and wrap her in the blanket from their bed. "Got held up. I'm fine, Mija. I'm fine." But she wasn't thinking about the cold or the long walk or the burst pipe. She was thinking about a promise made by a woman in a $15 jacket, and wondering if promises meant anything when they crossed the line between worlds. She had no way of knowing that across the city. Vivienne Laurent sat in her penthouse apartment, still wearing Elena's jacket, staring at the business card she'd found in the pocket, creased and worn, with Elena's name and the diner's address written in careful handwriting. She had no way of knowing that Vivienne had made 3 phone calls already, and was making a 4th, her voice quiet but determined in the pre-dawn darkness. Elena only knew that she'd done what felt right, and sometimes, in a world that often felt cold and cruel and indifferent, that had to be enough. The alarm went off at 6:15, dragging Elena from dreams of rain and strangers' faces. She reached out blindly to silence it, every muscle in her body protesting the movement. The walk home in the cold had settled into her joints, making her feel decades older than her 28 years. In the other room, if you could call it that, their apartment was really just one large space with a curtain dividing the sleeping area from the living area. She could hear Lucia moving around, probably making coffee. The smell of it reached Elena a moment later, and she forced herself to sit up, pushing back the blankets they'd piled on the bed last night. "You look terrible," Lucia announced when Elena emerged from behind the curtain, still in yesterday's clothes. "Good morning to you too." Elena accepted the coffee mug her sister offered, wrapping both hands around it in an unconscious echo of how Vivienne had held hers the night before. The memory felt surreal now, in the pale morning light filtering through their single window. Had that really happened? Had she really given her only warm jacket to a millionaire fashion designer? Lucia was 19, with the same dark hair and brown eyes as Elena. But where Elena had been softened by years of exhaustion and disappointment, Lucia still had that bright edge of possibility about her. She wore it in the way she moved, in the determined set of her jaw, in the stack of textbooks that never seemed to shrink on their small kitchen table. "Mama called while you were sleeping," Lucia said, settling onto one of their mismatched chairs. "The nurses said she had a good day yesterday. Asked about you." Elena's chest tightened. Their mother, Rosa, had been at Riverside Care for 2 years now, ever since the stroke that left her partially paralyzed and struggling with memory issues. The facility was one of the better ones, which meant one of the more expensive ones, and even with insurance, the bills were crushing. Elena worked 50, sometimes 60 hours a week across 2 jobs just to keep up with the payments. "I'll try to visit this weekend," Elena said, though she knew her schedule made promises difficult. Between the diner and her morning job cleaning offices downtown, she barely had time to sleep, let alone make the hour-long trip to Riverside. "She'd like that." Lucia hesitated, then added, "Elena, about my tuition. Don't." Elena's voice came out sharper than she'd intended. She softened it with effort. "We've talked about this. Your education is important. You're going to be a doctor, remember? We can't let anything get in the way of that. But you were going to be a nurse. You had to quit school because of me, because of Mama. I quit because it was the right choice." Elena set down her coffee and moved to her sister, putting her hands on Lucia's shoulders. "You're 20. You've got your whole life ahead of you. Me? I'm fine where I am. I'm good at what I do." It was a lie, or at least a half-truth. Elena was good at waitressing, good at cleaning, good at working herself to exhaustion. But those weren't the things she dreamed about when she was Lucia's age. She dreamed about wearing scrubs, about helping people, about having a career instead of just jobs. She dreamed about a life that looked nothing like the one she was living. But dreams were luxuries, and Elena dealt in necessities. Lucia looked like she wanted to argue, but the alarm on her phone went off, her reminder that she needed to catch the bus to campus. She gathered her books with practiced efficiency, shoving them into a backpack that was held together more by stubbornness than stitching. "There's leftover rice in the fridge," Elena called after her. "And some chicken. Make sure you eat lunch, okay? Not just coffee." "Yes, Mama," Lucia teased, and then she was gone, the door closing with a soft click that somehow sounded lonely in the silence that followed. Elena stood in the middle of their apartment, coffee growing cold in her hands, and let herself feel tired, just for a moment, just long enough to acknowledge that she was 28 and felt 50, that she was scared all the time about money and her mother and whether Lucia would actually make it through medical school or if some disaster would derail everything they'd worked for. Then she set down the coffee, went to the bathroom, a cramped space with water pressure that was more suggestion than reality, and got ready for her morning job. The office building downtown was 40 stories of glass and steel, housing various companies that Elena couldn't keep straight. Lawyers, maybe, consultants, people who wore expensive suits and carried briefcases and never seemed to notice the woman who emptied their trash cans and vacuumed their floors. She worked with a crew of 4. Maria, who'd been cleaning offices for 20 years and had stories that could make you laugh or cry depending on her mood. James, a quiet man in his 50s who was saving money to bring his family over from Jamaica. And Denise, who was working her way through nursing school and reminded Elena painfully of herself at that age, full of hope and determination. "You look rough," Maria observed when Elena arrived. Already 10 minutes late because the bus had been delayed. "Late night," Elena explained about the pipe burst as they worked their way through the 32nd floor, vacuuming and dusting and wiping down surfaces that would just get dirty again tomorrow. She didn't mention Vivienne Laurent or the jacket. Seemed too strange to say out loud. The work was mindless, which Elena usually appreciated. It let her thoughts wander to grocery lists and bill schedules and whether she could pick up an extra shift at the diner this weekend. But today her mind kept drifting back to the night before, to Vivienne's face when she'd accepted the jacket, to Mrs. Chen's revelation about who she was. A fashion designer. Someone who probably spent more on a single dress than Elena made in a year. Someone who lived in a world Elena only glimpsed through the windows of buildings like this one, where the offices on the upper floors had views of the city that took your breath away. "Earth to Elena," Denise said, waving a hand in front of her face. "You've been wiping that same desk for 5 minutes." Elena startled, realizing Denise was right. She moved on to the next office, this one belonging to someone who kept family photos on their desk. A husband, 2 children, a golden retriever. They looked happy in that particular way that came from security, from knowing where your next meal was coming from and not having to choose between electricity and groceries. "You ever wonder what it's like?" Elena asked suddenly. "To be them." Denise followed her gaze to the photos. "All the time," she admitted. "And then I remind myself that I'm working toward it. That this," she gestured to the vacuum, to their cleaning supplies, to their worn uniforms, "is temporary. We're not going to be doing this forever." But Elena was doing this forever. She'd given up nursing school 3 years ago, and there was no path back to it. The money wasn't there. The time wasn't there. And even if it was, she was so tired, so thoroughly exhausted by the daily grind of survival, that she couldn't imagine having the energy to study, to learn, to build something new. "Yeah," she said anyway, because Denise needed to believe it, needed to hold on to that hope. "You're right." They finished the building by 11:30. Elena had just enough time to catch the bus across town, change into her uniform in the diner's bathroom, and start her afternoon shift at noon. She did this 5 days a week, cleaning offices from 7 to 11:30, waitressing from noon to 9, sometimes later if there was a special event or someone called in sick. On a good week, she got 40 hours of sleep total. On a bad week, closer to 30. Margot's diner looked different in daylight. The harsh fluorescent lights were softer somehow, supplemented by natural light from the large windows that faced the street. The lunch crowd was already beginning to filter in. Construction workers from the site 3 blocks over, administrative assistants from the courthouse, a few regular business people who preferred the diner's honest food to the trendy restaurants that kept opening and closing in the neighborhood. Tommy was already in the kitchen, prepping for the rush. He gave Elena a wave through the window as she tied on her apron. A clean one today, without the tear she'd been meaning to fix. "You survived last night?" he called. "Barely. My feet hurt just thinking about that walk home. Should have called me. I could have given you a ride. You live in the opposite direction, and you've got your mom to take care of." Elena checked her section, making sure the tables were properly set. "I was fine." It was another lie, or maybe not a lie exactly, just a reframing of truth. She hadn't been fine. She'd been cold and exhausted and worried about Lucia waiting up. But she'd survived, which was what mattered. The lunch shift was brutal. The construction crew came in loud and hungry, ordering burgers and fries and endless refills of soda. The courthouse people were quieter but demanding, wanting their food fast so they could get back to whatever legal dramas were unfolding across the street. Elena moved between tables with practiced efficiency, taking orders and delivering food and clearing plates, her face arranged in the pleasant, attentive expression that earned better tips. She was good at this. Good at reading what people needed before they asked for it. Good at remembering that table 5 liked extra napkins and table 3's regular wanted his coffee with exactly 2 creams. Good at being invisible when they wanted privacy and present when they needed attention. By 3 o'clock, the rush had ended and Elena allowed herself to sit for 10 minutes, her feet throbbing. She'd been standing for 8 hours straight, and she still had 6 more to go. "You okay?" asked Sarah, one of the other waitresses, sliding into the booth across from her. Sarah was in her 40s, with bleached blonde hair and laugh lines that spoke of a harder life made bearable by humor. She had 3 kids, an ex-husband who was perpetually behind on child support, and an apartment that was somehow even smaller than Elena's. "Just tired." "When aren't you tired?" Sarah observed, but there was kindness in her voice. "You heard anything about that woman from last night? The fancy one." Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Word had clearly gotten around. Elena shouldn't have been surprised. Margot's was like a small town unto itself, with news traveling through the staff and regulars with impressive speed. "No, I don't expect to." Elena stretched her legs under the table, trying to work out the knots. "She was just someone who needed help. Mrs. Chen says she's famous. Says she's worth millions. Maybe. Doesn't change anything." Sarah studied her with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You know what your problem is, Elena? You don't expect anything for yourself. You give and give and give, and you never ask for anything back." "I don't need anything back. I need to pay my rent and keep Lucia in school and take care of my mother. That's it. That's the list." "And what about you?" Sarah pressed. "What about what you want? What about your dreams?" Elena stood up, suddenly unable to sit still. "My dreams are that Lucia becomes a doctor and my mother gets better, and we don't have to worry about money every single day. Those are my dreams." She walked away before Sarah could respond. Before the conversation could go any deeper into territory Elena couldn't afford to explore. Dreams were dangerous things. They made you want more than you had, made you dissatisfied with survival. And survival was all Elena had the energy for. The afternoon stretched into evening. The dinner crowd was lighter than usual. It was Thursday, and people were saving their energy for the weekend. Elena moved through her section on autopilot, her mind elsewhere. She thought about the jacket, wondered if Vivienne had thrown it away or if she'd kept it. She thought about her mother, who used to sing while she cooked, before the stroke stole her voice and her independence. She thought about Lucia, brilliant Lucia who was going to be everything Elena couldn't be, who was going to have the life Elena had sacrificed. And she thought about herself, about the woman she'd been at 19, full of plans and determination, that Elena had been going to change the world, or at least her corner of it. She'd been going to help people, heal them, make a difference. This Elena, tired, worn down, 28 going on 50 Elena, just tried to make it through each day. At 7, during a lull, her phone buzzed. A text from Lucia. "Got an A on my anatomy exam. Thanks for the study time last weekend." Elena smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest despite her exhaustion. This was why she did it. This was the point. Lucia's success, her mother's care, keeping their small family afloat. That was enough. It had to be enough. Order up. Tommy called from the kitchen, and Elena was moving again, delivering food, clearing tables, pouring coffee, smiling, always smiling, because that's what the job required. At 8:30, she was taking an order from table 9 when the door chimed. She didn't look up immediately, focused on writing down the specifics of how the customer wanted his burger cooked. But something made her glance toward the entrance. A man stood there in an expensive suit, holding an envelope. He looked around the diner with an expression that suggested he didn't spend much time in places like this. Then his eyes landed on Elena. "Elena Reyes?" he called. The diner went quiet. Even the kitchen noises seemed to pause. Elena felt every eye turn toward her. "That's me," she said slowly, walking toward him. He held out the envelope. "I've been asked to deliver this to you personally." Elena took it with hands that had suddenly started trembling. The envelope was heavy, made of thick cream-colored paper that felt expensive. Her name was written on the front in elegant calligraphy. "Who?" she started. But the man was already leaving, the door chiming behind him. Sarah materialized at Elena's elbow. "Open it," she hissed. "Open it right now." Elena's fingers felt clumsy as she tore open the envelope. Inside was a card, also expensive-looking, and a smaller envelope. She opened the card first. The handwriting was the same elegant script as on the outside. "Dear Elena, you gave me something precious last night. Not just warmth, but kindness when I needed it most. You saw someone struggling and helped without hesitation, without asking for anything in return. That kind of generosity is rare in any world, but especially in mine. I made you a promise. I told you I wouldn't forget. I meant it. Please accept this small token of my gratitude. It's not payment. You can't pay someone for genuine kindness. Consider it a gift from someone who was reminded that goodness still exists in the world. With sincere thanks, Vivienne Laurent." Elena opened the smaller envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a check. Sarah gasped. "Is that? How many zeros is that?" Elena counted them twice, then a third time, certain she was seeing things. The check was for $10,000. "Holy shit!" Tommy breathed from behind her. He'd come out of the kitchen, and now the entire diner staff and most of the customers were gathered around, staring at the check in Elena's hands. $10,000. 3 months of rent. 2 years of Lucia's textbooks. Months of payments toward their mother's care. $10,000 was more money than Elena usually saw in 6 months of work. "You have to cash it right now," Sarah said urgently, "before she changes her mind." But Elena was reading the card again, focusing on the words "small token." To Vivienne Laurent, $10,000 was a small token. To Elena, it was life-changing. "I can't accept this," she heard herself say. The diner erupted in protest. "Are you insane? Take the money." "Elena, don't be stupid." But Elena was thinking about what Sarah had said earlier, about how she never asked for anything, how she just gave and gave. And this felt like too much. This felt like charity, like pity, like someone from that other world looking down at the poor waitress and deciding to throw her some scraps. Except, she read the card again. That wasn't what this was it? Vivienne hadn't said, "poor thing" or "unfortunate woman." She'd written about kindness and generosity and goodness. She'd written like Elena had given her something valuable, not like Elena was someone to be pitied. "I need to think," Elena said, carefully folding the check back into its envelope. "Think fast," Sarah advised. "Because if you don't want that money, I know about 6 people here who'll take it." Elena laughed despite herself, and the tension in the diner broke. People drifted back to their tables, though the buzz of conversation was louder now, everyone discussing what they'd do with $10,000. Elena finished her shift in a daze. She took orders, delivered food, cleared tables, but her mind was spinning. $10,000 could change everything. What could it do? She mentally calculated the possibilities. pay off half of her mother's current medical debt, cover Lucia's tuition for the next year with money left over for books and supplies, fix the heating in their apartment that had been broken for 2 winters, buy a new jacket, she thought with dark humor. Or, and this thought came unbidden, dangerous, she could put some of it toward going back to school. Maybe take one class, just one, to see if she remembered how to be that girl with dreams. But that was selfish. That was putting herself ahead of her family. She made herself stop. She'd think about it tomorrow, when she wasn't so tired, when the world didn't feel so strange and tilted. She left the diner at 9:15, the check and card carefully tucked into her purse. The November air was cold, but not as cold as last night. She had her thin sweater, and that would have to be enough for the walk to the bus stop. Except when she reached the curb, there was a car waiting. The same man who'd delivered the envelope stepped out of the driver's seat. "Miss Reyes, I've been asked to drive you home." Elena stared at him. "By who?" "Miss Laurent was concerned about you getting home safely, given that she still has your jacket." He opened the back door. "Please. It would make her feel better." Elena should have said no. Should have insisted on taking the bus like she always did. But she was so tired, and the thought of a warm car instead of a cold bus was too tempting to resist. She got in. The interior smelled of leather and something else. Something expensive that she couldn't quite identify. The seats were heated, and she sank into the warmth with a sigh she couldn't suppress. "Where to?" the driver asked. She gave him her address, feeling embarrassed by the neighborhood, by the building with its peeling paint and broken intercom. But if he judged her for it, his face didn't show it. He simply drove, navigating the city streets with quiet efficiency. Elena watched the buildings pass by the window, the lights of downtown giving way to the dimmer streets of her neighborhood. She thought about the check in her purse, about Vivienne Laurent's careful handwriting, about the fact that someone was driving her home in a car that probably cost more than Elena would make in 5 years. When they arrived at her building, the driver got out and opened her door. "Miss Laurent also wanted me to return this," he said, retrieving something from the trunk. It was her jacket. But it wasn't just her jacket. It had been cleaned, professionally cleaned, and the frayed cuffs had been repaired. The stain on the left sleeve was gone. It looked almost new, despite being 3 years old and $15 to begin with. "She insisted," the driver said, seeing Elena's expression. "Said it was important that you have it back in good condition." Elena took the jacket, holding it carefully like it was made of glass. "Thank you," she managed. "Good night, Miss Reyes." She climbed the 3 flights to her apartment in a daze, jacket in one hand, purse with the check in the other. When she opened the door, she found Lucia at the table, surrounded by textbooks and notes, a half-eaten sandwich beside her. "You're home early," Lucia said, then saw the jacket. "Wait, isn't that... Did she return it?" Elena nodded mutely, setting the jacket on their small couch. Then she pulled out the envelope and handed it to her sister. Lucia read the card, then looked at the check. Her face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Shock, disbelief, excitement, then something more complicated. "Elena," she whispered, "this is... I know. We could... Lucia seemed unable to finish a sentence. "We could pay off so much. We could... Elena, you could go back to school." There it was. The thought Elena had been trying not to have, spoken aloud by her sister who always saw too much. "That money's for Mama's care," Elena said automatically. "For your tuition. For things we need." "But you need things too," Lucia argued, standing up and moving toward her. "You need rest. You need time. You need a life that isn't just work and worry." "I'm fine." "You're not fine." Lucia's voice rose, passion overriding her usual careful consideration of their thin walls and nosy neighbors. "You're exhausted all the time. You never sleep. You eat whatever's left over after I've eaten. You haven't bought yourself new clothes in 2 years. You gave away your only warm jacket to a stranger without even thinking about it. You're not fine, Elena. You're drowning, and you won't let anyone help you." Elena felt something crack inside her chest. She sat down heavily on the couch, next to the jacket that had started all of this, and put her face in her hands. "I don't know how to stop," she admitted quietly. "I don't know how to be anything except what I am. I don't know how to want things for myself when there's so much that all of you need." Lucia knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "Then let me tell you what I need. I need my sister to be happy. I need you to have dreams again. I need to know that you're not sacrificing everything for me and ending up with nothing. You're not nothing. Mama isn't nothing. I know that. But Elena," Lucia's eyes were bright with tears, "I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to make good money. I'm going to take care of Mama. I'm going to take care of you. But that's years away, and right now we have this chance. We have this gift from someone who saw you being kind and wanted to be kind back. Please, please don't refuse it." Elena looked at her baby sister, not so much a baby anymore at 19, nearly 20. Lucia had grown up while Elena wasn't paying attention, had become wise and determined and strong. When had that happened? "I'll cash it tomorrow," Elena said finally. "We'll figure out together how to use it." Lucia hugged her, fierce and tight, and Elena let herself be held. Let herself feel the weight of the decision settling into her bones. $10,000. A fortune and a pittance depending on which world you stood in. That night, Elena lay in bed unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling and listening to Lucia's steady breathing from the other side of the curtain. She thought about kindness and consequences, about how one small action, giving a jacket to a stranger, had spiraled into something she couldn't have predicted. She thought about Vivienne Laurent, probably sleeping in a beautiful bedroom in her Upper East Side home, probably not giving Elena or the diner or the jacket a second thought now that she'd fulfilled her promise. Rich people were like that, Elena had always assumed. They did their good deed, wrote their check, and moved on with their lives. But then she remembered the card, the careful handwriting, the specific words chosen. You saw someone struggling and helped without hesitation. That wasn't the language of someone just fulfilling an obligation. That was the language of someone who'd been genuinely moved. Elena must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing she knew, her alarm was going off at 6:15, dragging her into another day. She felt hungover despite not having drunk anything, her head foggy and her body reluctant to move. But she moved anyway. That's what she did. She got up, she got dressed, she made coffee, she went to work. Except today, tucked carefully in her purse, was a check for $10,000 and a promise that someone, somewhere, remembered her kindness. The morning passed in its usual blur of vacuum cleaners and dust rags and surfaces that would just get dirty again tomorrow. But Elena found herself working with a strange lightness in her chest, like something heavy had shifted even though she hadn't realized she'd been carrying it. At break, she sat with Denise in the small room they used for storing supplies. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said. "Sure. When you decided to go to nursing school, how did you know it was the right choice? How did you know it was worth the risk?" Denise looked at her curiously. "I didn't know. I'm still not sure. But I knew that if I didn't try, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what if. And wondering what if seemed worse than trying and failing. Even though you're exhausted? Even though it's so hard? Especially because of that," Denise said firmly. "If it was easy, everyone would do it. The hard is what makes it worth doing." Elena absorbed this, turning the words over in her mind. The hard is what makes it worth doing. She'd been doing hard things her entire adult life. Working multiple jobs, caring for her mother, raising her sister. But she'd been doing them without any vision of a different future, without believing that the hard could lead somewhere better. What if she let herself believe? What if she let herself want something, just for herself? The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. At lunch, during her break at the diner, Elena walked to the bank 3 blocks away. She stood in line with the check in her hands, still half convinced it would turn out to be a mistake, a joke, a dream she'd wake up from. But the teller took the check, examined it, and smiled. "Large deposit today." "Yes," Elena managed. "Would you like to open a savings account for this?" Elena hadn't thought that far ahead. She'd imagined depositing it into her regular checking account, where it would immediately get swallowed by bills and rent and necessities. But a savings account, that was different. That was intentional. That was planning for something beyond just survival. Yes, she said again, more firmly this time. Yes, I would. The process took 30 minutes, and Elena was late getting back to the diner. But when she walked in, she had a receipt in her purse showing a balance of $10,000 in an account that was just hers, separate from the checking account she shared with Lucia for household expenses. Sarah took one look at her face and grinned. You did it. You cashed the check. I did. Good. Sarah squeezed her shoulder. Now don't do anything stupid like spending it all on other people. Elena laughed, but the comment hit closer than Sarah knew. She'd already started making mental lists of how to spend the money. Mama's bills, Lucia's books, the heating, the roof that leaked in their bathroom. All worthy causes. All important. But Denise's words kept echoing. The hard is what makes it worth doing. What if she did something hard? What if she let herself want something? The afternoon shift was busy, and Elena was grateful for the distraction. She moved through her section with practiced efficiency, but part of her mind was elsewhere, calculating possibilities and impossibilities, weighing obligations against desires. At 4 o'clock, during a lull, her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but something made her answer anyway. Is this Elena Reyes? A woman's voice, professional but warm. Yes. My name is Catherine Mills. I'm calling on behalf of Vivienne Laurent. She wanted to know if you received her gift. Elena's grip tightened on the phone. I did. I please thank her for me. It was incredibly generous. I will. She also wanted to extend an invitation. Would you be able to meet her for coffee tomorrow afternoon? She'd like to speak with you in person, if you're willing. Elena's mind raced. Tomorrow was Friday, which meant she had the cleaning job in the morning and the diner shift starting at noon. But maybe she could ask Sarah to cover for an hour. What time? She asked. Would 3 o'clock work? There's a cafe called Arabica on 5th Avenue. Do you know it? Elena didn't, but she could find it. Yes. 3 o'clock. I'll be there. Excellent. Miss Laurent is looking forward to meeting with you again. After Catherine hung up, Elena stood in the middle of the diner, phone still in her hand, feeling like reality had tilted again. Vivienne Laurent wanted to meet with her. The woman who'd written about kindness and generosity wanted to have coffee. Who was that? Tommy asked from the kitchen window. I think, Elena said slowly, I think my life just got strange. The next afternoon, Elena walked into Arabica Cafe wearing her best clothes, which weren't much, but they were clean. Vivienne sat by the window, and when she saw Elena, her face lit up with genuine warmth. Thank you for coming, Vivienne said, gesturing to the seat across from her. I hope the check didn't overwhelm you. It did, Elena admitted. But I'm grateful. More than I can say. Vivienne smiled. I meant what I wrote. You gave me something precious, a reminder that kindness exists. But I didn't ask you here just to say thank you again. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I'm launching a new line, everyday luxury, clothes for real women living real lives. And I realized I have no idea what that actually means. I've spent 20 years designing for people who live in my world. I want to design for people who live in yours. Elena's heart began to race. I don't understand. I want to hire you as a consultant. Part-time, flexible hours around your schedule. You'd help me understand what working women actually need, what's practical, what's beautiful, what matters. You'd test designs, give feedback, maybe even model for the campaign. Vivienne named a salary that made Elena's head spin. More than she made at both her current jobs combined. For 20 hours a week. I don't know anything about fashion, Elena protested. But you know about living. That's what I need. Vivienne leaned forward. And there's something else. My company has a scholarship program. If you wanted to go back to school, we could make that happen. Nursing, right? Elena felt tears prick her eyes. How did you? I asked around. Found out about your mother, your sister, your dreams you put on hold. Vivienne's voice was gentle. You gave me your jacket without hesitation. Let me give you back a little of what you sacrificed. 3 months later, Elena stood in Vivienne's design studio wearing clothes from the new collection. Elegant but comfortable, affordable but beautifully made. The campaign was called Everyday Grace, featuring real women with real stories. Elena's face looked back at her from the mock-up poster, and she barely recognized herself. Not because she looked different, but because she looked hopeful. She was taking 2 classes at the community college. Lucia's tuition was paid for the year. Their mother had been moved to a better facility. And Elena had learned something important. Accepting help wasn't weakness. Sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let someone give back to you. The jacket, her $15 thrift store jacket, hung in Vivienne's office, framed like art. A reminder to both of them that small acts of kindness could change everything. Sometimes the people you help are exactly the ones who can help you back. You just have to be brave enough to let them. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel.